Hi, and welcome to Reset Revolution. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really happy to have you here. And could you just start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Adithan. I live in Chennai, which is the capital of Tamil Nadu, the state in South India. I go to an international school where we do the IB diploma. I'm 16 and I'll be going into my senior year after the summer break. And yeah, it's nice to be here. Thank you for
Okay,
having me.
great. And yeah, today we'll be talking about educational inequalities in India. And so, to start off, could you just give kind of an overview of the inequalities in education that exist in India?
Okay, yeah. To start off, I think everybody should keep in mind that there's about 1.3 billion people in this country. And so lots of the people over here live in rural areas. It's not completely people living in the cities, and so lots of families have to have their children travel reasonable distances just to get to schools, and that isn't feasible for some people. And in some cases, families are in such extreme poverty that they need their children to work in order to make a certain amount of income to sustain their lifestyle. So that's why lots of families themselves don't send their children to school, either because it isn't feasible or the opportunity cost is too high. And so even in the city where most children receive an education, but you have to understand that in India, the public schools or the government sponsored schools aren't the same as in the rest of the world. And so the standard of education is a lot lower. And so even if there are people receiving educations, they're still disadvantaged because of the resources or the quality of the education itself at these schools. And so if you want like a really good education, perhaps even with an international board or something like that, you'd have to attend a public school, which costs a little too much for the average Indian citizen, basically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And do you think there's a big difference between the rural and the urban schools?
100%, yeah, because lots of the more educated, even in some cases, a lot more of the literate population lives in the cities.
Mm-hmm.
And so mostly the educational opportunities that are better in the rural areas are from people who are engaging in like community service and things like that to educate citizens of rural areas. But most of it's becoming better now, where there are more schools being built in rural areas and things like that. But still, if you want a quality education, you'd have to travel a significant amount in most cases.
Mm-hmm. And have you personally or your family been affected by these inequalities?
Well, I have to say that me and my family are really fortunate to have never experienced things like that. And so we've had access to a quality education, me and my parents and their parents and all that. And so perhaps the only thing that we aren't aware of particularly is how things work in like international school in like other countries and things like that. So for example, if we wanted to go to college elsewhere, it would be a little hard to get some of that information readily available. But even things like that are changing, so I couldn't really call it a disadvantage or inequality.
Yeah.
But yeah, the only standpoint that I have in this discussion is based off of what I've seen and heard, and like when instances where we've worked with underprivileged students. But yeah, I haven't faced any myself.
Can you give an example of like a situation of an underprivileged student that you've worked with?
Okay, so I think something that we've seen that's really common right now is because of the pandemic. Of course, people can't go to schools, and I'm not entirely sure what it's like there. But I think for us, since March of last year, there's been a 2 week stretch for which people went back to schools, but other than that, we haven't like set foot in our schools at all for almost a year and a half now, or a little less than that. But of course, that affects people disproportionately, right? Because the fact that we're able to have this conversation online itself is something that not many people get to do. And so
Yeah.
for people that don't have access to, say, even mobile data, right? Because Wi-Fi is something that is a privilege for some children here as well. And so the alternate to that is mobile data, which is certainly cheaper, but still some people don't have access to. And the devices that you need to access that as well. Like you can't have a simple phone; you need a smartphone or a tablet or something like that to access the resources that you need. So a lot of the work that we've been doing right now to help students is creating material that they can use on lots of devices so that they won't necessarily need to like have a call with the teacher or like be in an online class to learn.
Yeah.
But that's a very common situation, which is people are forced to like use the small phone screens to look at
Mm-hmm.
material and learn based off of that, or use like physical books and things like that that they've had in the past to learn.
Yeah, yeah. So you talked about, so do you do like community service with these people? Is that what you do?
So I mean, I don't have like a structured thing of I regularly help a certain thing, a certain like kind of people, but we our school is very into like helping underprivileged students because it's like a culture in our school that
Mm-hmm.
we've as in we are who we are because of the environment that we live in and like
Yeah.
the society that we have, so we should give back to them as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's something that our school is really big into, so I've had a lot of that through our school itself. But of course, with CAS being a requirement of IB, that's
Yeah.
something that we've looked at a lot. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it sounds a little weird that I'm saying we've looked at those things for CAS. But what I mean to say is that it's opened a lot of opportunities that we didn't know of before. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it's really nice to work towards certain things like that. So basically, what we do is if anybody finds an opportunity to help or something like that, we let each other know on
Mm-hmm.
our class group or whatever, and then we lots of us try and work towards whatever that opportunity is.
Yeah. Well, you already kind of addressed my next question, but more kind of on a bigger scale, what do you think can be done to address the educational inequalities?
Okay, so first off, I'll say that a lot has been done already, and so things are a lot better now than they are before. And so this might seem a little much, but one of the biggest things or one of the most successful policies that has been implemented, at least in my state, is to provide students with a meal if they were to come to school. And so in doing that, they can either take food back from their family, or parents don't have to worry about providing for another person in their households. And so it's actually a really popular opportunity to send kids to a government school. Then that way they get an extra meal. But if you're looking at the present right now, then it's actually pretty significant the number of organizations working towards bettering the lives of students. And like I'm just one person who's worked with like a couple of organizations, but I'm sure there's like hundreds of organizations out there working with thousands of students.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure that lots of progress is being made, but that's why I said to remember the population, the 1.3 billion people, out of which there's at least like 300, 400 million children. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to reach them all. And so, to answer that question in a sentence is probably I don't know. There has to be some sort of government intervention of some kind, which I know that governments have tried. So one thing that our government did was to try to provide devices to students so that they'd be able to access online resources. But I
Mm-hmm.
think ultimately it was deemed that that would be a little more counterproductive because phones can be used for other things. Parents might take them and things like that. You never know what happens, which is why they decided to provide them with paper resources or like print resources so that they can study on their own. But yeah, so I think that there's a lot that can be done, but the extent to which it's feasible, I'm not sure about. But things are heading in the right direction right now, I think, in my opinion. Even though I mean, I'm probably not qualified to talk about the whole of India because I know very well things that are going on in my state, but not the rest, which is something that I should research about as well. But yeah, I think that things are moving in the right direction, but because of the population, there needs to be lots of larger scale intervention
Yeah,
to
definitely. I think,
yeah, to
yeah, I
make a
mean,
significant
yeah.
yeah.
I think it's great that individual students like you are doing things to help, but there also does need to be large scale intervention. Yeah. All right, well, thank you so much for sharing your perspective today. It's been really interesting to hear from someone who lives there. And, well, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.